$1,750, and you told me when we first got together that you would be willing to go $1,800 if we found a house. So does this house have everything that you want? I say, well, yeah, it does. Say, sold, you can pay full price for this house. And they'll be like, well, you know. So you can do it, but what you're doing is you're reminding them that you're giving them permission to buy the house at the price that they said they were willing to spend. Okay? And it will make it easier for you in negotiation with pricing. Reminding them what they said they were willing to spend. Does that make sense? Okay? Good. All right. Where were we? Settlement, possession. Now, they have a new clause in here in D, so let me see what D was. Oops. At the time of settlement, D. Okay, there's a whole new paragraph put in here between C and D. I'm going to show it to you. My computer doesn't lock that. It's like my computer is running a screen because everything I touch is taking really slow to cooperate here. Okay, so in red, we have new language that they felt that we needed. For purposes of prorating real estate taxes, again, one of the most confusing things that buyers and sellers don't understand. The periods covered are as follows. This will help all of you because you can never remember which taxes you're talking about, so it's a clarification for you. Municipal tax bills, they're your county and township. In Pennsylvania, or for the period January to December, okay? And the school tax bills for, and they got very specific, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Scranton school districts are January to December. School tax bills for all other school districts are July 1st to June 30th. Okay? Where are we? We're July 1st to June 30th, right? So I didn't even know that other states have theirs. So obviously there was confusion in the state of Pennsylvania. So now that makes your life easier.
Oh, cool.
Okay?
Cool.
Moving past that, you're explaining this agreement. Conveyance from seller will be by fee simple deed of special warranty unless otherwise stated here. Those of you who've been in the business a long time, how do you explain that? What does that mean? How do you do it?
When they get the
Does
deed.
Anybody just gloss over this because you don't know what it means? I thought so. Okay.
When the buyer gets the deed, it is free of any liens, right?
That's not what that means.
That doesn't
That's not what
mean
that means. So, Wayne?
You own everything from below the ground, all rights and all improvements, as well as air rights, and it's everything from above to below the ground.
Okay, that's not what it means though. Go to your consumer guide. Let's talk about this consumer guide. Okay? This consumer guide is a tool. Now you all know where to find it. Every single buyer that you meet with, this is one of the things that you show you have value when you want to get to a buyer face-to-face, you get them on the internet and say, you know, I have some things that are really going to help you when it comes time to make an offer. I have a complete guide that's going to help explain all of the paperwork that goes with making an offer in the state of Pennsylvania. And I'd like to go over that with you. And then you give them this booklet, and if you look at it, this will save you in a lawsuit. There's a risk reduction form inside page 1 that says Consumer's Guide to the Agreement of Sale, acknowledgement of receipt. A buyer can never say to you, well, you didn't explain that to me. I didn't know what you meant when you were just talking about that agreement of sale really fast. This is a huge risk reduction tool for you to give this to a buyer, have them sign that they got it. That shows that you did your due diligence, and this has helped us in a lawsuit that we were involved in, where a buyer says, I don't know what you were talking, you didn't explain that to me, I didn't know. Guess what? This is in plain language written for buyers. Huge, huge asset tool for you to have when you meet with a buyer for the first time. So let's go to the page that talks about special warranty deed, which should be on page Where do you got it?
Possession,
Possession,
page 11.
11. All right.
Special warrants.
Did they skip over that? Okay, so special warranty deed. That's interesting, they didn't do every single thing. Okay, special warranty deed, here's how I explain it. It's the only kind of deed we're able to give you in the state of Pennsylvania. That's it. There's a general warranty deed. Okay, then there's a special warranty deed. Special warranty deed is the only kind of deed that you can get in the state of Pennsylvania. Move on. That's it. It's that simple. Okay? It's the only kind of deed you can get in the state of Pennsylvania.
Oh, that was easy.
Isn't that easy? Payment of transfer taxes will be tight. You know how to do that, right? That's easy. You're going to divide the transfer tax, pay attention whether or not you have more than the typical 1% transfer tax. Okay, in areas of the city of Philadelphia. Who's in Philadelphia? Anybody? What is it now? 4.5?
4.
2 on each side.
Two on each side. There are areas of Delaware County, I think it's Upper Providence Township, Delaware County has a higher transfer tax. Collegeville Borough, I believe, has a higher transfer tax. So make sure you know what the transfer taxes are in your municipality, okay, for your closing costs. If you do it on trend, it's automatically in there, so you really don't have to worry about it. But when you see the numbers not 1%, you know that it's different, okay? Possessions to be delivered by deed, so you say you're going to get, unlike other states, some other states like Colorado, New York, like they go to settlement and then they don't move in for days later. You want to especially explain this to buyers because if they come from another state, they may not realize that everything takes place the same day. When you have a buyer that comes from another state, they get very overwhelmed. They say, well, we have to do everything the same day. We have to go to settlement and move in, get the moving truck and move in. Well, you don't have to move in, but yeah, you do settlement the same day and move one thing. They may not realize that. So in Pennsylvania, you say you will get the keys, you get possession the day of settlement. Okay? If the seller has identified in writing the property subject to a lease, you have to use the lease, the tenant occupied property addendum is attached. Make sure that you know that that is in here if you're ever purchasing a property where the tenant is remaining in the property. Okay? Know that that little box is there. Be familiar with that. So, Mr. Byer, we have this clause called dates and time is of the essence. Who can tell me what time is of the essence means in plain language as if you were explaining it to a buyer? What do you say?
Fulfill your obligations, dates and times.
Say that again?
Fulfill the agreed times and dates.
Tell me how you're explaining it to a buyer. So you have a buyer sitting in front of you, Will. And you say, now we're at this paragraph here that says dates and time is of the essence. What this means is, what do you say?
Well, I say what this means is that through this process, which it is a process, there are certain times that and certain activities that have to be fulfilled, which there are dates that are assigned to them, and we want to be within those times. If we don't fulfill those dates or times, we will be asking for an extension. There is no, going past it and forgetting about it. So time is of the essence, just fulfilling the dates and times as required and as agreed. That's what I say, in a nutshell.
That was good. Wayne?
Without undue delay or unwarranted delay.
Okay.
To stay under contract.
Help me as a buyer to get this in plain language.
Oh, I would say if we don't make these deadlines, that it's going to render our offer void. Like we
Yep.
have to stay
No,
within this
necessarily.
office. We can ask.
Be
we can ask
careful,
for an
be careful. Don't
extension.
say, don't say about void. What's the major risk to, Bev, you want to say something?
I usually say we want the date here, we want to answer by that date of our
Okay.
contract.
Okay, but the paragraph itself, guys, okay? Here's what you do with this paragraph, okay? Dates and times of the essence. We have dates in this contract that we're going to decide upon together, okay? In which things must happen by that date. If they don't happen by that date, you risk losing your deposit money. If you decide not to purchase the house for any reason whatsoever, okay? You're at risk. Don't talk about void, don't use legal terms like that, okay? And don't say that if we don't meet the dates, we'll have to extend them. Because there is no obligation for a seller to extend them. So, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, my job is to make sure that we stay on track and meet all of these dates because we cannot rely on the seller to agree to an extension. So, and then you're going to talk, then that opens it up. See, as you're explaining this agreement of sale, it's going to open you up to, that's why it's going to be important that we know when you're going to make application for your mortgage, when you're going to make your inspection, like you can't wait, and you start talking about all of the dates that are coming up. And then you say, but there's this form that I'm going to give you that's going to remind you of the dates, and it's my job. Always convey your value. It's my job to be sure we stay on track with each and every date because I don't want you to be at risk. Always say you don't want them to be at risk. All right? So the first thing there, written acceptance by all parties will be on or before. On or before. We used to have it, we would say the seller must respond by X date. And then they would cross it out and then you say, okay, here's my counteroffer. The buyer must respond by this date. So what you're saying now, because we changed this 3 years ago, is that on or before whatever date, we must agree, if we can, on these terms. Does it always happen? No. Right? You put a date in there, Paul, right? It doesn't always happen.
Hardly ever.
Hardly ever happen. Nobody even pays attention to it later. Because you go back and forth, you could have had an agreement. But that's where a buyer could walk and go somewhere else. You say, oh, we didn't have an agreement, you're talking, they go and put an offer in somewhere else, and the seller says, well, wait a minute, now I want to give you the counter. And say, I'm sorry, you did have a date in there, but we didn't extend it. They can go buy another house. So it is an important date to be reminded of, especially if you're on the seller side, because the buyer can walk after that date, something else comes up. Can't dilly-dally. Settlement dates are identified for the performance of any obligation in this agreement are binding, okay? Now, the execution date, when's the execution date of an agreement of sale?
Both parties.
Last signature or initial.
The time of the last person who signs it is the execution date.
Or initials.
Be sure that if there are changes, that your changes are always what?
Dated.
Dated and initialed. Dated and initialed, always. Because they may sign it, but then made a change over here, and then that has to go back, and then that's the date. So it's the last date of the final change. And don't ever go back and change it like 3 weeks later or something. Somebody's like, well, we're just going to go back and change that. But no. Everything that happens when it happens is when it works. All changes to this agreement of sale should be initialed and dated. The funny thing is that anytime you see anything bold, that's the committee giving me what I wanted. Because it became a joke that Kathy Opperman wanted everything bold. So I fought hard for things that were very important to get them bold. So when you see bold,
Thank you, Kathy.
that's to help you, because I know you needed help, okay? But it's to point out. So when you're going through this paragraph, you say there are going to be times and dates in this contract that we must be sure that we meet. Okay? The first one's going to be the settlement date. I'm going to help keep you on track for all the other dates. It's going to be very important that you make your mortgage application and do everything. Whatever you don't do by the time, you're at risk of losing money. Boom. That's it. Okay? And you can go down each one and say execution date. These are all things that everything in the agreement of sale hinges upon the execution date. The execution date is the last date that everybody agrees to everything. Everything we do from that point forward hinges on the execution date. You okay with explaining that? Okay?
So it's not the date that this agreement was signed?
Nope, it's the execution date.
Initials and
Every
changes.
time in this agreement of sale hinges on the execution date.
Right.
So write that word hinges, so maybe that'll help you
Right.
remember, okay? Settlement date is not extended by any other provision of this agreement, may only be extended by mutual written agreement of the parties. So we say, we can extend the settlement date, but everybody has to agree. You can't just say, I can't get off work that day, we need to do it now in October, and we get a September 30th settlement. Everybody's gonna have to agree. You're explaining that there. Certain time periods, all right, they felt we had to put this in. Certain time periods are pre-printed in this agreement as a convenience. Don't ever let a co-op agent tell you that because something is in there as pre-printed, and the big example of this, the reason we had to put this in here was because of the escrow paragraph that says 365 days. Do you know the paragraph that I'm talking about? The buyer can get their money back, okay? That we change in our office, not everybody does. A lot of co-op agents, I had to argue with a broker in the beginning. He's like, you can't change that, it's underlined and there's no blank there. And And I said, well, please refer to the bottom of page 1 where we added certain times are pre-printed for convenience but may be changed by striking out pre-printing, blah, blah, blah. Okay? The new agreement, they put it as a blank line and they did it the right way. So you'll see that change come up. All right, so the only language they added at the last part of letter E. So letter E, certain times are pre-printed, you can strike them out. They have a comma, and then it says, unless restricted by law. So there must be some things that you can't change in agreement. What would that be? Which dates in an agreement of sale, at the top of your head, that those of you who've done an agreement, cannot be changed because they're governed by law?
Holidays?
Nope, in reference to homeowners associations. Right, remember you have how many days by law to review homeowner association documents?
7 days? 5 days.
5 days, or the buyer can cancel the contract, remember? So those dates that are governed by law can never, ever be changed. We'll cover that when we get there. Okay? Top of page 2, or page 3. Zoning classification, you don't have to put it in there if it's anything other than residential, but I always usually just put residential in there so it's clear. Make sure that you confirm the zoning of the property under letter number 6 for zoning.
Sorry, Kathy.
Yes, yes.
Sorry to go back. Just,
Go ahead, sure.
and maybe you said it clearly, I just didn't catch it. So let's say those pre-printed inspection days, it says 10 days.
Yes.
In the parentheses.
Yep.
Do I have to strike that out? And let's say we agree to 15 days? Do I literally have to strike that out or just put 15 days?
No, just 15,
Okay,
because it
fine.
says 10 if not specified.
Right, I just wanna make sure
Specifying
I
is putting
I
in.
was
Good
supposed to strike
question.
out.
No,
Okay,
good question.
Thanks.
Okay, fixtures and personal property. This paragraph, every time we redo it in committee, we get something new to add to it. So, because we say, well, the people in the committee say, well, I just had a problem with. So the newest thing that will be added here is window covering hardware is what it used to say. Now we're saying including rods and brackets. Well, what is window covering hardware if it's not rods and brackets? So for some reason, they felt that we will be specifying that in there. But this is a very important paragraph, and this brings more questions up. Right before settlement or at walkthrough, someone takes something they should not have taken. So I would advise you, when you're going over a contract with a buyer or a seller, you go through and read everything on here. And then if it becomes a question, it's always the intention of the article. What was the intention when the seller put it up? Was it the intention for it to stay there forever? Okay? Or was it for them to remove it, replace it? It always goes to intention. So go through everything here, being aware of what they have in their house, okay? Be very careful when you're including theater sound systems. If you put in a description in the MLS that the property comes with a home theater surround system, and you don't exclude the system, it's wired for surround sound, but that doesn't mean that the speakers are necessarily coming with it. We actually had somebody on another issue who took, did we add it back in? I forget where they got this in last time. The battery backup to the sump pump, they took that with them when they moved. They took, because it was not included as an included item, because that's something that can be unplugged.
Yeah.
And who was it, Kelly? Somebody in our office had that, remember? They took it with them, and the seller said, well, that was mine. That's something I plug in like a computer backup, you know, to a, what do you call those things that you call a battery charger backup thing? Just like I would have in my computer. And we're like, yeah, well. Even though the intention was to make sure it really is the same thing as plugging in a computer. If you see that in a house, and the buyer sees it, and you point out what it is, you say this is a battery backup that the seller has on the property. It is not something that is included automatically. If we want it included, we need to write it in inclusions. If you have a seller, you say, will you be including that battery backup with the sale of the property? Well, no, we're taking it with us. They're expensive. They're $600, $700. So exclude it or include it.
But what if they didn't exclude it? Because they have the
Who?
option.
Who
The
they?
sellers. They have the option to exclude.
That they didn't think they had to, because to them it's
Right.
personal property.
Right, so but you're saying that at the end, they were able to walk away with it or no?
No, they didn't, the buyer didn't get it,
Oh, okay.
because the seller did take it,
Yeah.
but the buyer thought they should have it.
The buyer law. That's what I'm asking.
Now, sometimes that you can look to the home inspection report, and the home inspector will say, this seller has opted to have a battery backup system, it's a good idea for you also to have one, then that kind of solidifies that it's a personal property item. So that's one thing that I know is a problem, okay? So be very careful and go through everything that's included or excluded. If there are any things that are leased, we had this out last time, propane tanks. A lot of people don't even realize, you have to ask a seller, is your propane tank owned by you or is it leased for your heat? You need to find that out. If it's leased, then you have to put it on here, and then somebody has to do the due diligence and see what the contract is and how it's transferable to a new buyer. Excluded fixtures. Some people fail to look at this paragraph, even though it's right here above mortgage, and we did move it here for that reason, so people look at it. Don't ever forget to look when you get an offer of what the buyer wants, because they may be asking for things that you didn't say were even available. So always look there. Mortgage contingency, we're going to spend some time here. The easiest part is waived, right? Cash. We all would like to have cash. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. You have a cash buyer, and you're going to present an offer to a seller, and you just put waived, and you give the agreement of sale with them with what?
Letter
BFI,
A buyer's financial statement that says what?
that they have the funds to buy the house.
And they're going to show the funds on the buyer's financial statement. So
Right.
you're all in agreement that when you have a cash sale, you still need a buyer's financial statement that shows where the cash is coming from. And the buyer signs and says, this is my true and correct information, and this is where I'm getting the cash from. So they don't want to fill out a buyer's financial statement because they don't want to fill out any of the other stuff. Do they have to fill out how much money they make or anything else on there? Do they have to? No. What else could you use instead of a buyer's financial statement?
Proof of funds,
Proof of funds in what manner? What would you give
from a
them?
bank,
From a bank, so what are you giving them?
a letter,
A letter from a financial officer of a bank that says, please be advised that Mr. and Mrs. John Smith have substantial funds in excess of $500,000 to purchase. Remember, it's not only the purchase price, it's the purchase price plus the closing cost. So you have a letter, totally acceptable, yes? Okay, you need something. Copy of, you're going to say, a bank statement, okay? Anything that the buyer is going to use. Sometimes they don't want to give their bank statement. We have high-end customers who have a lot of money in the bank. They don't want you to see how much money they have in their bank. So then you say, go to an officer of the bank and please have them write a letter. That's acceptable. Okay, so just because it's cash doesn't mean you don't see proof of funds. You still must see where they're coming from. It's not great, just great enough to have waived on there. Okay? You good?
Kathy,
Yes.
you recall I had two instances where I had clients that did not want to do BFIs.
Yes.
And they said that they're not required to do this, so I just want to make that statement. What I had them do is to write, they refused to fill this out, because I wanted it to be acknowledged that, I asked them to do it. They refused to do it, but I asked them to at least write that they refused to fill it out. So just want to say it's not required. You definitely want to try to get it.
Very, very good point. A buyer's financial statement is not required by Pennsylvania law. It is a policy of our company that you get to see a BFI. It is customary in southeastern Pennsylvania, in the Philadelphia marketplace, to use a buyer's financial statement. If you go to the Poconos, if you go to Harrisburg, if you go to Pittsburgh, they just give pre-approval letters. They don't use buyer's financial statements. And to us, it's like, well, how would you know? How would you know where their closing costs are coming from? How do you know? Well, on ISO, they just don't. It was very interesting. So we rely on them, and the seller relies on that information. But many, many times over the years, it's what that buyer puts on that buyer's financial statement. They have to understand that they're saying, we have this money, and we're using this money. And if they don't, if they have $10,000 in the bank, and they go out and they buy, I don't know what you can buy with $5,000, they go buy furniture and use the money in their savings, they can be in default of the agreement of sale for taking money that they represented they were using and spending it. So it's very important that you explain that to them when they fill out that buyer's fund. This is showing where the money is, and you cannot touch that money for anything else. in the same way that you'll read here, they shouldn't open any charge cards or get into any more financial debt that's going to affect their status. All right? Good question, good point. Okay, so now we go to the mortgage. In the old days, when this agreement was coming out in 2010, we were still seeing people doing a first mortgage and a second mortgage to avoid PMI. Okay? So they would do an 80-10-10. They would get an 80% loan, or 90-10-10, am I backwards? They would get a 10% second, and remember when the market fell apart, everybody had these second mortgages. They did that to try to avoid private mortgage insurance, okay? They put 10% down, they had 10% on a second loan, 80% on the first. So you had a first mortgage and second mortgage. We haven't used the second mortgage probably since this agreement sale came out 3 years ago. But who knows if we go back to that someday. So you elect the mortgage, make sure that X is always there. First mortgage, second mortgage. The loan amount, very simple. Minimum terms, very simple, right? 30 years is typical. If they're doing 15, you better know that. Type of mortgage must always be filled in. What are your choices?
Conventional, FHA, and VA.
Okay? Conventional, FHA, VA.
Adjustable rate.
Adjustable could be in there. There could be adjustable. There could be, what,
USDA.
state, yeah, USDA. What's the other one? Home loans, like whatever type of loan, that's what you're putting in here. The lender should be in here. Now, the reason we put it in here when we redid the agreement is because a lot of people, a lot of things that happen in the market is because people went to online lenders. And if the seller said, if I would have known that you were using Quicken Loans, I would have never taken your offer. That's why we put in here. So say up front who the lender is. Then, if you have it here and you change a term in the contract, what then has to happen? Both people have to agree to change the mortgage lender. So you have to explain that. If we're going to put a lender in here, it's not you're not obligated to put a lender in here, but if you're going to put a lender in here, make sure that you, if you're going to change it, you have to change it by an addendum to the agreement of sale. Does that make sense? Okay? There's a change here. That's why my computer was slowing down. Scan right. Okay? There's a change here. For conventional loans, the loan to value LTV ratio is not to exceed blank %. Now, did you need something, John?
No.
You good? Okay. A lot of agents struggle with how to explain loan to value. It's very important that the loan to value is here for protection for your buyer, whether or not you use an appraisal contingency. And it's going to get confusing for those of you who are new. So what I want you to know is that what you need to put in here is exactly the loan to value. If someone is putting down 5%, what's the loan to value percentage you fill in here? 95%. If somebody's putting down 20%, what's the loan to value that you put in here?
80%.
So it's always 100 times what they're putting down. And don't get crazy like 96.5. Like always try to make them put down 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%. And at what number do they not have to pay in a conventional loan? At what number do they not have to pay mortgage insurance? They do what?
20%.
Loan to value, 80% or down or lower. Okay? So if they're putting 20% down, the loan to value is not 20%. Always remember it's 100 minus what they're putting down. That's what loan to value is. Those of you who are brand new, it's 100 minus the percentage of their down payment is your loan to value ratio. This is a protective number. The reason we put this in the agreement of sale when we did was because if you, and even if you do, if you use an appraisal contingency, here's how it really protects. I'm going to give you the worst case scenario and the best protection for your buyer. You put an appraisal contingency in the agreement of sale, and you say, this property is contingent upon an appraisal. Appraisal should be completed, I don't know the exact words, in 21 days. Okay? The appraiser goes out, they appraise the property, in 2 weeks it comes in for appraised value. Ta-da! Everybody's happy. The appraisal contingency expires. okay, because it had to happen in 21 days. Now we're a week before settlement. The holy underwriter, okay, they're holier than everybody, looks at the appraisal, does their little research that they do and find out there's another comp out there, and rejects the appraisal. Ellen, it happens, right? Happened to you? Okay, rejects the appraisal a week or two before settlement. And you say, oh, that's okay, I have an appraisal contingency. Do you? No, because it what?
Expired.
Expired. What do you do?
Correct.
Craig, if you have the loan to value in there, if you're a smart buyer's agent, you have the loan to value in there, they only want to loan 80% of the appraised value, okay, of the sale price. If that loan cannot be approved for that number, 80% of that, you have an out. You have an out. Now, you're the seller, and the buyer agent forgets to put that in there. Then are you going to remind them to put it in there? No. It's always like, this is what you do. Like it's who are you serving? So if you're the seller and the agent is not wise enough to put an LTV in there, don't go chasing them down to do it. Because it's actually a protection for the seller. Oh, well, you didn't appraise. You're still going to try and work the deal out. You're still going to go back and forth and try and figure a number if you can. But when it's your buyer side, you're going to want to keep the deal solid and protect them. Okay? Chris?
Okay, what happens when you're a dual agent?
That's when you pray. Well, you'll always fill it in. You'll always fill it in, and you have an obligation as a dual agent to do the same thing for that buyer that you would do for any other buyer. Okay? That's where you have to do exactly as if you can't treat them any differently. The only difference with dual agency is you have to hold confidential information. You still have to treat them the same as if you would treat every other buyer. You can't do anything different. Same thing as if you're the seller. Okay? Good question. All right, so the mortgage, you understand, loan to value, the lender, the interest rate. So you know, what are the interest rates today? You should always be aware what the interest rates are.
4.3.
4 3/4. That's what they were yesterday. You know, so a buyer says, well, the interest rate, well, I got a better rate from another lender. How often do interest rates change?
Daily.
Every hour. Every hour. So if they got a rate the other day, say, well, I understand that. But this is the conversation you have with them when you are doing a buyer consultation in the very beginning, and you explain interest rates will change every hour. So what you may see in the paper or online yesterday, or somebody said they change every hour for every company. It's not like some companies they change one day, they change for everybody depending on what the bond market is doing. So what is the spread here? So here's another protective mechanism for your buyer. The interest rate is blank. However, the buyer agrees to accept the interest rate as may be committed by the lender not to exceed a maximum interest rate of what? So we're going to put today's rate, or are you going to put a little lower? Because remember, whatever you put in here becomes a term of the contract. So if the rates are 4 3/4 today, and they go down to 4 1/2, do you still want your buyer to buy the property? Okay? But if they go up to, usually we used to say in the old days, right? 2%, right? Ellen, we used to go 4.5 to 6.5. Well, a lot of people can't qualify at 6.5, so it's a lot tighter now. So I would say go lower than the rates are, okay? And then go up
1%
To 5.
to 5.
not that much. Don't put a rate that's any higher than what you know the buyer will qualify for. You have to know how much your buyer will qualify for. Don't obligate them for something, because the worst thing to happen is you get a mortgage commitment and you say, okay, well, the rates went up and they didn't lock in, so now they committed at 5.5%. They will go to 5.5%. Trust me, they will. I mean, the interest rates are going to go to 5.5% sooner or later. 5.5%. And you say, well, my buyer can't buy the property. Really? Why can't they buy it? You said in your agreement of sale they could go up to 5.5%. You're in trouble. okay? Do not go any higher with this spread than what they can go for. So you may have to keep it really tight. So the way to do it is go a little lower. So if they're 4 3/4, maybe you go to 4 1/4, okay, to 5 5 1/4. If somebody can qualify at 4 3/4, they can probably go to 5. They can probably go to 5 1/4, but make sure you know.
Should we
Okay.
take that from their pre-approval?
Talk with the loan officer. Yeah, they're going to pre-approve them on that day's interest rates, but say, I need to know what, to put in here. Usually you can be pretty safe with just going about, not a whole point. So if it's 4 3/4 today, I would not go 5 3/4. Some people cannot go that high. It can be a significant change, and $20 or $30 a month, they might be too tight. Okay? So I wanted to spend some time there so you understand that. Discount points, loan origination, loan placement, other fees charged by lender as a percentage of the mortgage, not to exceed, okay? In the old days, we used to have points. We don't have points anymore. Everybody is usually putting 0 in there. Okay, there are no points, no nothing else.